Keanu Reeves sat alone in a quiet preparation room, a gentle silence resting over the polished floor, the folded suits, and the soft glow from a single studio light. He was supposed to be getting ready for the charity event downstairs, but his attention kept drifting. Tonight was about kindness, hope, and second chances, themes he believed in deeply, yet his heart felt strangely heavier than usual. He could not explain why, but he sensed that this evening would not stay simple. On the small table in front of him sat a plain cardboard box, recently delivered by an assistant from the donation area. People had sent old belongings for a special auction, and Keanu had offered to personally look at a few items that seemed meaningful. The box looked ordinary and unimportant, worn edges, no name on top, just a small label that read mixed personal items. There was nothing special about it, yet his eyes kept returning to it like something inside was calling his attention. Finally, he pulled the box closer and lifted the lid, the faint smell of paper and dust rising into the still air. Inside were random objects, a scarf with faded colors, a small snow globe with a cracked base, a stack of postcards without messages. He moved them gently, treating every object with quiet respect, wondering about the stories behind each piece. Then near the bottom, he saw something thin and flat, half hidden between two envelopes. It was a single photograph, slightly bent at the corners, the colors softened by time yet still clear enough to feel alive. As he picked it up, he felt a small tightening in his chest, as if his heart recognized something before his mind did. He turned the photo toward the light and leaned closer, ready to see a stranger or a random moment from someone else's life. Instead, what he saw made his breath slow and his world become strangely quiet. In the center of the picture stood Sandra Bullock, smiling gently at the camera, her expression calm, warm, and quietly brave. She was standing outside a building that Keanu did not recognize, its glass doors reflecting a pale sky and blurred shapes behind her. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a softness in her eyes that suggested something deeper, something fragile, like a person trying to be strong for someone else. The sight of her like that touched him more than he expected. But it was not just Sandra that shook him, it was the background. Behind her, slightly out of focus, a familiar figure appeared, walking out of the glass doorway dressed in a dark jacket and simple jeans. The angle was not perfect, yet the face was unmistakable. The man behind her was Keanu himself, younger, with the same posture, the same thoughtful expression, the same way of carrying quiet emotion behind his eyes. The problem was simple and terrifying at the same time. He had absolutely no memory of this moment. Keanu stared at the image for a long time, his fingers pressing lightly against the edges of the photo, careful not to damage it. He tried to search his mind for any connection, any small fragment that matched this scene. He had traveled to many places, worked on many sets, visited countless cities and events, yet his memory gave him nothing. The building in the background did not ring any bell. The clothes looked familiar but not specific, and even Sandra's hairstyle did not help him place the timeline clearly. He leaned back in his chair, holding the photo in front of him, feeling a growing mix of confusion and unease. It was not the kind of fear that came from danger. It was the discomfort of realizing that a meaningful piece of his own life might be missing from his memory. And the presence of Sandra in that missing moment made it even heavier, because she was someone he respected deeply, someone whose trust mattered to him more than public stories or headlines. He remembered their years of friendship, the comfortable laughter between them, the shared silences that did not need explanation. He remembered long conversations about life, loss, hope, and quiet resilience. He remembered how protective he sometimes felt toward her, not from a place of control, but from simple care. Yet nothing about this picture fit into the memories he already held. It was like opening a familiar book and suddenly finding a chapter he never wrote. He looked closer at Sandra's expression in the photograph, noticing the way her smile almost hid something else. Her eyes had a softness that usually appeared when she was carrying emotional weight, but still choosing to stand strong for others. It was a look he had seen on people who were healing from something difficult, something personal that they did not want to make public. He wondered if that day had been one of those private battles. The thought made his chest ache gently. Somewhere inside him, a quiet voice whispered that this moment had mattered, not just for her, but for him as well. The photo felt like proof of a kindness he had given or received, yet it remained locked behind a closed door in his memory. He hated the idea of forgetting something important, especially if it involved Sandra. For him, respect was not just a word, it was a responsibility. If there was a day when she had needed support, he wanted to remember how he had stood beside her. A soft knock sounded at the door, and his assistant spoke from the hallway, saying that guests were arriving and the event would start soon. Keanu replied calmly that he would be there shortly, his voice steady even though his thoughts were still spinning. He slipped the photograph gently into the inside pocket of his jacket, placing it close to his heart without even thinking about the symbolism. He thanked the assistant and turned back to the table, but his focus was gone. The evening downstairs suddenly felt different. Usually before such events, he prepared himself with quiet gratitude, reminding himself that every guest, every donor, every small act of generosity mattered. Tonight, however, a part of his mind stayed locked on the mystery of that photograph. He could imagine telling himself that it was nothing, just an odd coincidence, a forgotten event from years ago. But something deeper refused that explanation. It felt like a silent invitation to look closer, to understand, to remember. He thought of Sandra again, of her calm strength and humble nature. She was not someone who liked unnecessary drama. She preferred privacy, authenticity, and simple human kindness. If this photo contained a story that involved pain or vulnerability from her past, he did not want to approach it carelessly. He wanted to respect her boundaries, to make sure that any question he asked came from a place of care, not curiosity. Kindness meant more to him than solving a puzzle. Yet the mystery did not let go. Why was this photograph in a random donation box, mixed with forgotten objects from someone's life? Who had owned it? Who had decided it was no longer needed? The idea that someone had treated this moment as something disposable hurt him in a way he did not fully understand. Because to him, even without the memory, the image felt important. It showed Sandra at a delicate moment, and it showed him close by, as if their lives had crossed at a point that mattered more than either of them ever realized. He walked slowly to the mirror and looked at his own reflection, studying the face that had changed over the years yet still carried the same quiet weight. He thought of how time can shape memories, hide them, or bury them under new experiences. Sometimes the mind protects itself by letting certain details fade. But what if, in trying to protect himself, he had lost something precious, something that could help him understand his own journey better? The idea stayed with him like a soft but persistent echo. The sound of distant music floated up from the hall downstairs, signaling that the program had officially started. Keanu straightened his jacket, feeling the corner of the photograph press lightly against his chest. He took a slow breath, reminding himself that tonight he still had a responsibility to be present, to support the cause they were gathering for. Stepping away from the table, he moved toward the door with steady steps, carrying both his public calm and his private questions. As he reached for the door handle, he paused and glanced back at the empty cardboard box on the table. For a moment he considered leaving the photo on the desk, telling himself that he could return to it later. But a deeper instinct told him not to let it out of his sight. It was more than paper and ink now. It was a bridge between something forgotten and something still waiting to be understood. It was a connection to Sandra that felt strangely urgent. He decided quietly that he would speak to her about it, not tonight in front of cameras and bright lights, but soon in a calm and private space where both of them could breathe. Whatever the story behind that picture was, he wanted to hear it from her own voice with the same respect he had always offered her. And if the truth brought pain or regret, he would face it with humility and care. Because real friendship deserved that kind of courage. As he opened the door and stepped out into the softly lit hallway, one last detail from the photo flashed suddenly into his mind. He remembered the faint reflection in the glass behind Sandra, a blurred image of her looking towards someone just outside the frame. In that small reflection, her eyes did not just show calm strength, they showed deep gratitude, as if she was looking at someone who had held her together when she felt like falling apart. That realization made his heart tighten. There was a story there, hidden in that reflection, in that building, in that forgotten moment. A story about pain, healing, and quiet kindness, a story that might change how he understood his past with Sandra. For now, he did not know the details, only that his reaction to the photograph was not just confusion, it was something far more emotional. The feeling stayed with him as he walked toward the sounds of the charity event, carrying a question close to his heart that would not let him rest. Keanu moved through the bright hallway with measured steps, but his mind struggled to stay present. Every light felt sharper, every sound echoed more than usual, and every heartbeat carried the same silent question. The photograph in his pocket felt heavier than a simple piece of paper. It felt like a missing memory asking to be seen again. He greeted a few guests with polite kindness, his smile warm yet slightly distant, as if a part of him remained in that quiet room upstairs with the old photo. The charity event hall opened wide in front of him, filled with people who had come to support a cause close to his heart. Soft music blended with gentle conversation, and warm studio lights made the atmosphere comforting. Keanu expected the familiar sense of calm duty to settle over him, yet something inside remained unsettled. The image of Sandra smiling in that forgotten moment kept returning to his thoughts, pulling him back into confusion and quiet longing for answers. He stepped toward the main stage area where organizers waited with notes and schedules, offering him welcoming smiles. They explained the evening's plan, but his mind drifted again toward the strange photograph. He kept nodding politely, grateful for their trust and support, but he felt a subtle pull in his chest, a reminder that something from his past was calling him with gentle urgency. He wished he understood why the image carried such emotional weight, yet he accepted that meaning often arrives before explanation. The event's introduction began, and Keanu stepped forward to address the audience. His voice carried its usual calm sincerity as he spoke about compassion, community, and the quiet power of generosity. The crowd listened closely, appreciating the warmth behind his words, but even as he spoke, he felt the photo resting against his heart like a small heartbeat of its own. Each time he inhaled, he sensed the mystery waiting for him, asking to be faced. After his speech, he moved quietly toward a corner table where a display of donated items stood behind a velvet rope. People admired the collection of memorabilia, personal belongings, and meaningful gifts offered by supporters and friends. The cardboard box from earlier had already been placed in the sorting area behind the display. He wondered who had donated it and why the photo had been inside. There were no names, no notes, no hint of ownership. The lack of identity made the mystery even stronger. Guests approached him with kind words, asking for photos or brief conversations, and Keanu welcomed each moment with respect. He believed every small interaction carried meaning. He never wanted anyone to feel dismissed or unimportant. But even as he listened with gentle attention, he felt his thoughts circling the same unanswered question. Why had he forgotten a moment that clearly mattered? And what had Sandra been going through in that picture? The softness in her eyes suggested something more than a casual day. After an hour of greetings and warm exchanges, Keanu stepped aside for a short break. He walked to a quieter hallway outside the main hall where the noise faded into a soft hum. He leaned against the wall and touched the inside of his jacket, feeling the smooth edge of the photograph. A calm breath left his chest as he pulled it out and looked at it again under the soft ceiling light. The building behind Sandra caught his focus now. Its glass doors reflected pale daylight and faint silhouettes. The structure looked clean and modern but lacked any sign or logo. He tried to recall if they had filmed near such a place or if they had visited a center together during a charity project. Nothing surfaced. It felt like chasing smoke. He studied his younger face in the background, noting the way he walked, the gentle tilt of his head, the calm concern in his expression. He recognized that expression well. It was how he looked when he was trying to support someone without drawing attention to their pain. For a moment he wondered if the memory had faded because the day held sadness, something his mind had chosen to protect him from. But he did not fear sadness. He feared forgetting something that mattered to someone he cared about. The idea that Sandra might remember this moment while he did not made his heart grow heavier. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. An old friend from the organization approached him, smiling kindly. She asked if he was doing all right because he seemed quieter than usual. Keanu appreciated her concern and reassured her gently, saying he felt fine, just thoughtful. Her warm smile reminded him that kindness exists everywhere, even when the heart feels unsettled. As she left, Keanu made a decision. He could not let confusion stay unanswered. He needed to understand the memory, not for curiosity, but for respect. Sandra deserved honesty, and their friendship deserved clarity. He decided he would visit her the next day, not with worry, but with gentle intention. He wanted to understand the story behind the photograph, and he wanted to hear it in her own words. The event continued, and he returned to the hall with renewed calm. He focused on the purpose of the evening, meeting donors, sharing gratitude, and helping raise support for meaningful causes. Yet the photograph remained present in his thoughts, reminding him that life carries stories unseen by crowds or cameras. Some of them wait quietly until the right moment to reveal themselves. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Keanu found a moment of stillness near the main entrance. He watched people step out into the night with warm smiles and lighter hearts. He loved witnessing the quiet joy that kindness brought to others. But when the hallway finally emptied, he reached into his jacket once more, needing to see the photograph again under the soft lights. He gazed at Sandra's gentle smile, noticing how it seemed both fragile and brave at the same time. He noticed the way sunlight had touched her hair in the picture, giving her an almost hopeful glow. And then his gaze shifted to the faint reflection in the glass behind her, where she seemed to be looking toward someone just outside the frame. He studied the reflection carefully. Her eyes in that reflection carried more emotion than he first realized. They looked grateful, relieved, almost like someone who had been quietly struggling and had just found strength again. The thought pressed deeply against his heart. If he had been there for her that day, why could he not remember it? What had they spoken about? What had she been healing from? Had he comforted her? Had he supported her through something difficult? He hoped he had. He wanted to believe that his presence had helped, even in a small way. Kindness often arrives in small moments, and he wanted to trust that he had offered it when she needed it. He returned upstairs to the quiet preparation room after the event ended. The staff had already cleaned most of the space, but the soft light still glowed gently on the table where the empty cardboard box sat. He placed the photograph on the table and sat down, letting himself breathe slowly. The silence felt welcoming now, as if giving him space to think clearly. He looked at the photograph again, but this time something new caught his attention. Near the bottom corner, almost hidden by the faded border, a tiny symbol appeared, printed faintly on the glossy surface. It looked like a part of a logo, maybe from a developing studio or a facility. The symbol was too small to identify clearly, but it seemed familiar in a distant way, like something he had once seen but forgotten. He leaned closer, trying to place the symbol in his mind. For a moment he felt a strange tug of memory, like a door unlocking somewhere deep within, but the image slipped away before he could hold it. He pressed the photo lightly against his fingertips, feeling its age, its fragility, and its weight. A quiet thought rose in his mind. What if the story behind this picture was not just about a forgotten moment? What if it held something deeper, something about Sandra's past that he never knew? Something about their connection that had been hidden by time and silence? The idea carried both warmth and sorrow, and he felt his heart lean toward the truth waiting ahead. He straightened in his chair and slipped the photo back into his jacket, no longer confused about what he needed to do. Tomorrow he would go to Sandra's home. He would show her the picture. He would ask gently, respectfully, with the same kindness he always tried to offer her. He knew she trusted him. He trusted her too. Whatever the truth was, they would face it together. He stood up slowly and looked at the quiet room one last time. The mystery felt larger now, but so did his sense of purpose. He walked toward the door, ready to leave, but paused as a sudden realization washed through him. If this photo had resurfaced after many years, it was not by accident. It had returned for a reason, and that reason was waiting for him in a story he had forgotten but was about to discover. The next morning arrived with a soft gray sky that carried a quiet stillness, the kind that gently prepares the heart for something important. Keanu woke early, long before the city noise began, his mind already circling the same quiet question. The photograph lay beside him on the bedside table, its presence warm and unsettling at the same time. He picked it up with careful hands, studying every detail again, hoping for a spark of memory that still refused to come. He sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. Today he would visit Sandra. Today he would face the mystery directly. He felt no fear, only a deep sense of responsibility mixed with a strange emotional pull. Something inside him whispered that the truth behind this picture would change how he understood his past and maybe even his future. He rubbed his thumb gently across the worn corner of the photograph, wondering who had saved it and why it had finally returned. After getting ready, he stepped outside into the cool morning air. The breeze carried a sense of clarity that helped settle his thoughts. He walked to his car with slow and steady steps, placing the photograph safely in the inner pocket of his jacket. The moment he started the engine, he felt a small tightening in his chest, like his heart sensed that today would reveal something long hidden. The drive to Sandra's home was quiet. He kept the radio off because he wanted the silence. Silence helped him think clearly. Silence helped him breathe. The road felt strangely familiar, as if he had traveled it many times before for reasons beyond simple friendship. He thought about Sandra and the many years of trust between them. She was someone who valued respect and privacy, someone who never asked for special attention. If she had been carrying a memory that involved pain, he hoped he would handle it with the gentleness it deserved. When he finally reached her driveway, he paused for a moment, letting his hands rest on the steering wheel. The soft morning light fell across her house, giving it a calm and peaceful glow. He stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward her door, each step measured and thoughtful. He knocked gently, almost as if he feared disturbing the quiet harmony of the morning. The door opened after a short moment, and there stood Sandra, wearing a soft sweater and a surprised smile that warmed the space between them. Her eyes carried a mix of curiosity and affection, the kind that comes from years of steady friendship. She invited him inside with the same gentle kindness she always offered him. He stepped in, feeling a familiar comfort in her warm and minimal home. They sat in the living room where sunlight washed softly across the wooden floor. Keanu sat quietly for a moment, gathering the right words. He did not want to startle her. He wanted to honor whatever truth was waiting in her heart. Finally, he reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph, holding it carefully between his fingers. When he placed it on the table in front of her, Sandra's expression shifted instantly. The warmth in her eyes softened into something deeper, something more emotional. She leaned forward and touched the photo with trembling fingers, her breath slowing as she absorbed the sight again. Keanu watched her closely, noticing how her calm exterior hid a wave of feeling she did not immediately speak about. Sandra took a slow breath and looked at him with gentle honesty. She asked where he had found the picture. Keanu told her about the donation box, the forgotten items, and how this photograph had appeared at the bottom as if waiting for him. He told her how he had stared at it, trying to remember the moment, but nothing returned. He spoke with a soft, steady voice, hoping she heard the respect behind his confusion. Sandra listened quietly, her hands resting near the photograph like she was protecting it. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quiet sadness. She said the picture was from a day that mattered deeply to her, a day she believed he might not remember because something had happened afterwards that affected his memory. Keanu felt a soft ache ripple through his chest as he listened. He had feared this possibility, and now it felt real. Sandra looked down at the photo, her fingers gently tracing her own face, then the faint silhouette of him in the background. She said it was a day when she had been struggling with something personal, something heavy, something she had not talked about openly. She said he had shown up unexpectedly that day, offering quiet company without asking questions. She said his presence had kept her steady during a moment when she felt overwhelmed inside. Keanu listened carefully, absorbing every word. The idea that he had been there for her in such a meaningful way filled him with both warmth and sorrow. Warmth because he had been able to help her, and sorrow because he could not remember giving that support. He wished he could relive that day in his mind, remembering each detail, each emotion, each moment of connection. Then Sandra hesitated, her eyes lowering slightly. She said there was something important he did not know, something she had never told him. She explained that after spending time together that day, they had walked toward the parking area near the building. She remembered him saying something gentle, something comforting. Then she paused, as if choosing her next words carefully. She revealed that shortly after they parted ways, he had been involved in a small accident. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to leave him shaken and disoriented. It had happened so quickly that he never connected the accident with the moments they had shared earlier. A doctor had told him he might experience mild memory loss from the shock, and she believed this specific moment had slipped away because of that. Keanu felt his breath tighten slightly as he absorbed the truth. The idea that he had supported her through an emotional moment and then forgotten it because of an accident felt both heartbreaking and mysterious. He could almost sense the memory on the edge of his mind, like a shadow waiting for recognition. But no matter how deeply he searched, nothing clear surfaced. He asked her gently why she had never told him. Her eyes lifted toward him, carrying warmth mixed with quiet vulnerability. She said she did not want him to feel guilt or regret. She did not want him to think his support had caused his accident. She valued his peace more than the explanation of that day. So she had carried the memory alone, grateful for his kindness, but choosing not to burden him with the truth. A long silence filled the room, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that holds deep respect and understanding. Keanu felt moved by her honesty, touched by her kindness, and humbled by the idea that a moment he had forgotten had meant so much to her. He placed his hand near hers on the table, not touching directly, but offering silent comfort. Then Sandra added something unexpected, something that deepened the mystery. She said the building behind her in the photo was not just any place. It was a center she had been visiting for emotional support during a difficult period in her life. She had never told anyone about her visits, not even close friends. The fact that Keanu happened to show up that day had felt like a small miracle to her. Keanu asked softly how he had known to come. She shook her head gently and said she never told him where she was. She believed he had simply sensed something in her voice during a brief call earlier that week. Perhaps he had felt she needed company. Perhaps his heart had led him there. But whatever guided him, his presence had changed everything for her that day. As Keanu absorbed her words, a soft shiver of emotion rose inside him. The story felt like a puzzle with missing pieces still waiting to be found. The accident explained his missing memory. Her silence explained why the story never surfaced. Yet one question remained heavy in his mind, a question he had not yet asked. How had the photograph ended up in a random donation box? Before he could ask, Sandra lifted her gaze and said something that made the air feel still. She said the photograph had been kept by someone else, someone neither of them had seen in many years, someone who knew the story behind the picture. Keanu felt a quiet chill run through him as she paused. The truth about that person would change everything he believed about that day. And Sandra said she was ready to tell him. Keanu felt the room grow denser with silence as Sandra paused, her fingers resting lightly on the old photograph as if it carried the weight of two different lives. Sunlight filled the living room in soft stripes, but the brightness did nothing to ease the tension building gently between them. He leaned forward slightly, not rushing her, offering her quiet space to gather strength. She breathed slowly, her eyes studying the picture with a tenderness that made Keanu's heart tighten. She finally lifted her gaze and began to speak in a calm and steady tone. She said the photograph had not been taken by her or by him. It had been taken by someone who was at the center that day, someone who noticed the shift in her mood when Keanu had arrived. The person had quietly captured the moment because it represented something rare and meaningful, a moment where unexpected kindness softened a hard day. She said the photographer had been gentle and respectful, not intrusive, simply witnessing a quiet exchange between two people who understood each other deeply. Keanu listened with focus, feeling the story open layer by layer. He asked softly who the photographer had been. Sandra's expression changed again, this time carrying a hint of sorrow mixed with warmth. She said the photographer was a woman named Claire, a volunteer at the center who had supported her during her healing journey. Claire was the kind of person who carried a quiet strength, the kind that helped others without wanting praise. She had a calm presence, steady eyes, and a kindness that reminded Sandra of peaceful mornings and warm blankets. He asked if he had ever met Claire. Sandra nodded slowly and said he had met her briefly that day, just before the accident. Claire had helped guide him toward his car when he seemed slightly distracted by worry for Sandra. She had spoken to him kindly, telling him that Sandra would be all right, that his presence had helped more than he realized. Sandra remembered how Claire had returned afterward with a small smile, saying Keanu had a gentle soul. Keanu felt a faint echo inside him, a distant feeling like a flicker of memory trying to surface. He could almost imagine a soft voice, a calm hand on his shoulder, a sense of reassurance in a stressful moment. But the memory refused to form fully, slipping away like a shadow that could not hold shape. He accepted the uncertainty with quiet grace, focusing instead on Sandra's voice as she continued. Sandra said she had stayed close to Claire after that day because she trusted her deeply. Claire had supported her through the emotional storms she was facing, offering wisdom without judgment. She became an anchor during a time when Sandra felt lost inside herself. And that photograph became Claire's way of reminding Sandra of the strength she held and the kindness she had received when she needed it most. Keanu asked gently why the photograph had been in a donation box if Claire had kept it. Sandra took a slow breath, her eyes softening with a sadness that felt older than the room around them. She explained that Claire had moved away a few years after that day, leaving the center to care for a family member who had fallen ill. She stayed in touch with Sandra for a while, sending warm messages and thoughtful letters filled with encouragement. But life became complicated, and their communication gradually grew quieter. After a few years had passed, Sandra received news that Claire had passed away. It had been sudden, peaceful, but deeply heartbreaking. Sandra had mourned her quietly, honoring the memory of the woman who had guided her through such an emotional chapter. Claire's belongings had been sorted by a small group of relatives who did not know the significance of many items. Sandra believed that the photograph must have been among Claire's personal keepsakes, accidentally mixed into boxes of items that were later donated. The truth settled heavily into Keanu's heart. He felt a soft ache for Claire, a woman he barely remembered yet owed something meaningful to. She had witnessed a moment of emotional connection between him and Sandra that he had forgotten. She had understood the importance of that day in a way he never could because the memory had slipped from his mind. He felt grateful for her kindness, grateful for her instinct to protect a moment that mattered. Sandra said she believed Claire kept the photograph because she saw something in that moment that neither of them fully understood at the time. She believed Claire saw the way Keanu looked at Sandra with quiet concern, saw the way Sandra's gaze softened the moment he arrived. saw the healing energy that bloomed between them even in silence. She believed Claire recognized that kindness could become a turning point in a person's life, and she captured it so they might someday remember. Keanu stared at the photograph again, feeling the story breathe new meaning into every corner of the image. The strange tug in his heart now felt heavier, but also clearer. He no longer wondered why he felt emotional when he first saw the picture. He understood now that this moment represented a forgotten truth about himself, a truth about how deeply he cared for the people in his life and how instinctively he offered kindness when someone needed it. But another question rose inside him, a question stronger than the rest. He asked Sandra why she had never shown him the photograph herself. She closed her eyes for a moment before answering. She said she had planned to tell him many times, but she feared bringing back memories tied to his accident, memories that might cause him discomfort. She said she wanted to protect his peace, the same way he had protected her emotional state that day. So she chose silence, believing the day belonged more to her healing than his memory. Keanu nodded slowly, understanding her intention deeply. He admired her respect, her humility, the way she always placed the well-being of others above her own. He felt a warm tenderness rise inside him, a renewed appreciation for the quiet strength she carried so gracefully. He placed his hand carefully on the table again, this time moving slightly closer until their fingers nearly touched. She did not pull away. Then Sandra spoke again, her voice shifting into something more hesitant, something carrying a hidden truth. She said there was one more detail about the day that he deserved to know. She said it was the part Claire had told her privately, the part Sandra had never shared because she did not know how he would feel about it or how it would change their bond. Keanu waited with steady patience, offering her calm reassurance. She took another breath and explained that Claire had observed something important that day. She said that when Keanu had arrived, he did not simply offer comfort. He offered recognition, as if he could sense her silent struggle without needing a single word. Claire had described him as someone who carried an emotional intuition, someone who moved toward people in pain without being told, someone who understood human emotion more deeply than he realized. But then came the part that made Sandra's voice soften even more. Claire had told her that Keanu looked at her that day with a kind of tenderness she had rarely seen in two people who were not speaking. She said his eyes followed her movements gently, as if he was making sure she did not break. She said his concern came not from obligation, but from something deeper, something honest, something unspoken. Claire believed that the photograph captured the moment he saw how fragile Sandra felt and quietly stepped into the space to carry a part of her emotional weight. Keanu felt the words settle into him like soft rain, spreading warmth and sadness at the same time. He did not remember the moment, yet he could imagine himself doing exactly that. He could imagine being present for Sandra in a way that did not demand thanks or recognition. Kindness had always been his language, and Sandra had always been someone he cared about deeply. The thought touched him in a place he rarely let others see. Sandra looked at him with quiet honesty and said that the reason she kept the story hidden was simple. She said she believed that moment was not about understanding the past. It was about understanding how kindness can shape a person even when they do not remember giving it. She believed the memory had stayed with her because she needed it, and the forgetting had stayed with him because he deserved peace. Keanu breathed slowly, absorbing the layers of her truth. He felt grateful for her vulnerability, humbled by her trust. He told her gently that he wished he could remember the moment, not for pride, but to relive the connection that helped her heal. She smiled softly and said the memory belonged to both of them, but the healing belonged to her. A quiet stillness filled the room again, warm and heavy with emotion. But Sandra was not done. She touched the corner of the photograph and whispered that there was still one more truth to uncover, one more piece of the story that Claire had hinted at but never fully explained. She said the building behind her held a secret about his connection to her healing that he did not know yet, and the truth inside that building would change everything he understood about their past. The room felt heavier as Sandra spoke her last words, and Keanu sensed the shift immediately. It was not fear, not sorrow, but the quiet weight of a truth waiting to rise after many years. He watched her closely as she took a slow breath, her fingers resting on the photograph like it carried a pulse from the past. Sunlight touched her face softly, revealing a calm strength beneath her hesitation. Keanu leaned forward slightly, offering her silent reassurance. He wanted her to know she did not have to hide anything now. Whatever truth was waiting, he would face it with kindness. Sandra looked down at the picture again, studying the building in the background, the one with the glass doors and faint reflections. She traced the edge of the structure gently with her fingertip, as if trying to pull hidden meaning from the faded shapes. Then she lifted her eyes and began to explain with a soft and steady voice. She said the building was not a simple support center as he first believed. It was a place that had been saved by anonymous donations many years ago, a place that continued to help countless people, because someone decided to give quietly without wanting credit. Keanu listened carefully, sensing something familiar rising in the air. He asked gently who the donor was. Sandra paused, her expression softening into something emotional, something tender. She said the center had survived because of one single donation made during a difficult period, a donation that came without a name, without a message, without any desire for attention. It was one generous act that kept the doors open, allowing people like her to find help, hope, and healing. Keanu asked softly why she was telling him this now. She took another breath, steady and full of meaning. She said the donation had come from him. The words entered the room quietly but landed in Keanu's heart with deep force. He stared at her, confused at first, then stunned, then slowly overwhelmed. He shook his head slightly, not in denial but in disbelief. He asked her if she was certain. She nodded with gentle conviction. She said Claire had known because she had seen the anonymous record during a financial review for the center. She had recognized his past foundation details even though the name had been removed from the public listing. Keanu leaned back slowly, trying to absorb the truth. He remembered supporting many programs over the years, offering help where he could, never seeking attention, always choosing anonymity. But he had never known which places his donations might one day touch in a meaningful way. He never expected that one of those places would become part of Sandra's healing journey. The realization washed through him with a mixture of awe and quiet sadness. Sandra continued, her voice softening even more. She said that when Claire discovered the identity behind the donation, she had been deeply moved. She had kept the information private, believing that anonymity was important to him. But she had also understood how powerful it was that his kindness had shaped a place that later shaped Sandra's healing. Claire believed it was a circle of connection the universe had built quietly, without either of them knowing. Keanu felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had never sought recognition for giving. He had always believed that kindness carried its own purpose, its own quiet impact. But learning that Sandra had found strength in a place he unknowingly helped support stirred something profound inside him. It felt like two hearts had crossed paths long before they realized it, guided by compassion that worked in silence. Sandra leaned back and folded her hands gently. She explained that the day captured in the photograph was her final session at the center. It was a day of transition, a day when she was stepping out of a difficult chapter and into a new one. She had been afraid, uncertain, and emotionally fragile. Seeing him arrive without warning had felt like a sign, like the universe was telling her she was not alone. She said his presence reminded her of hope, strength, and kindness at a moment when she needed it most. Keanu lowered his gaze, feeling a deep ache inside. He wished he remembered that moment. He wished he could see her through the eyes of his younger self. He wished he could recall the emotions that moved through him that day. But even without the memory, he felt the truth settling into his soul. He had been there for her in ways he never knew, both through his presence and through an act of generosity that reached her long before he realized it. Sandra touched the photograph again, turning it slightly to catch the sunlight. She said Claire had taken the picture because she believed it represented something rare, something deeply human. She believed the moment captured the meeting of two souls who offered each other silent strength. She believed the image held a kind of emotional light, the kind that comes only from genuine connection. Claire had said she wanted them to have the picture one day when they were ready to understand it. Keanu felt a soft tear forming in the corner of his eye, but he held it back with steady breath. He did not want to overwhelm the moment. He wanted to honor the depth of the truth unfolding in front of him. He asked Sandra why Claire never gave the photograph to them personally. She said Claire had planned to return it after finishing her personal commitments, but life had changed suddenly. She had passed away sooner than expected, leaving her belongings in the care of relatives who never learned the value of the picture. Keanu absorbed the story fully, feeling the weight of years settle gently into his heart. He felt sadness for Claire's passing, gratitude for her wisdom, and a deep emotional connection to Sandra that grew stronger with every layer of truth revealed. He realized that the photograph was not just a forgotten moment. It was a map of kindness, a record of a connection that had been forming long before either of them understood its meaning. Sandra then shared something even more delicate. She said that when she discovered the identity behind the anonymous donation, she had cried quietly in the privacy of her room. She cried not from sadness but from gratitude. She felt moved by the idea that someone she admired had unknowingly supported her healing long before she realized she needed help. She felt humbled by the idea that his kindness had touched her life twice, once through support and once through presence. Keanu felt his heart grow heavy with tenderness. He had never imagined that his quiet choice to give would return to him in such an emotional way. He looked at Sandra with new understanding, seeing the story of their connection unfold like a quiet river running through the years. He told her gently that he was grateful for her honesty, grateful for her trust, grateful for the way she carried her truth with grace. Sandra smiled softly, her eyes warm with emotion. She said she believed the photograph had resurfaced because the story behind it was ready to be seen. She said the truth had waited because they needed to reach a point in their lives where vulnerability felt safe and honesty did not feel heavy. She believed they were ready now, ready to honor the connection that kindness had built between them. Keanu took a long breath, letting the truth settle deeper. Then he asked the question that had hung silently in the air. He asked why Claire believed the moment in the photograph mattered so much. Sandra answered with a gentle voice. She said Claire believed that kindness is never forgotten by the heart, even when memory fails. She believed that souls recognize each other before minds understand. She believed the picture was not about documenting a moment, but about preserving a connection that would reveal itself at the right time. Keanu felt the words touch him in a place too deep for simple expression. The story, the memory, the kindness, all of it formed a quiet truth. But Sandra was not finished. She leaned forward, her expression shifting into something filled with emotion, something close to revelation. She said the building behind her held one more secret, one more truth that tied their lives together in a way neither of them expected. She said the reason he came to the center that day was not coincidence. It was connected to something deeper from his past, something he did not yet know. And the final truth would change the meaning of the photograph completely. The air in the room grew still as Sandra spoke those final words, and Keanu felt something shift inside him, a quiet tension rising like a tide that knew it was carrying truth toward the shore. He watched her with steady eyes, open and patient, letting her take her time. He could feel the photograph resting on the table between them, almost like a bridge linking their past to the present. Sunlight touched the image gently, giving it a soft glow that felt strangely symbolic. Sandra drew a slow breath, gathering strength, then continued in a calm and emotional voice. She said the reason he had come to the center that day was not an accident. She said it had been connected to something Claire discovered, something she had never shared publicly because she wanted to honor his privacy. Sandra explained that Claire had worked closely with the administration of the center and had access to certain historical files, files that listed major contributors and the purpose behind their donations. She had found something unexpected in the early records, something that revealed why Keanu had felt so drawn to that place. Sandra then looked into his eyes with a tenderness that carried deep respect. She said Claire learned that the donation he had made years earlier was not random. He had chosen that center specifically because someone he cared about had once needed support from a similar environment. He had given in honor of someone he admired, someone whose quiet resilience had shaped him. Keanu frowned softly, his confusion deepening. He asked who the person had been. Sandra held his gaze for a long moment before answering. She said he had made the donation in honor of his late sister. The words entered the room gently, but they struck Keanu with deep emotional force. He felt a sudden warmth rise in his chest, followed by a wave of grief mixed with reverence. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself with slow breaths. He had lost his sister many years ago, a pain he carried silently, wrapped inside memories filled with love and sorrow. He had honored her life through kindness, giving quietly to places that helped people feel safe, supported, and seen. He always believed that offering help was a way to keep her spirit alive. Sandra continued with a gentle voice. She said Claire had discovered that his donation carried a small handwritten note that had been archived by the director. The note did not include his name, only a sentence written with sincerity. The message read, "I hope this place becomes a safe light for someone who needs a moment of strength." Claire had never told Sandra the exact details, but she knew the message came from him. She believed the universe had a way of connecting people through acts of kindness, even when intentions remained anonymous. Keanu opened his eyes slowly, absorbing the truth. He remembered writing many such notes during his life, always signed with no name because he believed kindness should speak for itself. The idea that one of those gestures had later supported Sandra's healing made his chest ache in a beautiful and painful way. It felt like his sister's memory had reached through time to help someone he deeply cared about. He lowered his gaze, his breathing slow and heavy with emotion. Sandra placed her hand gently over his, not gripping, just resting with soft reassurance. She said she had learned this truth only after Claire passed away. Claire had whispered it to her during their last conversation, saying she wanted Sandra to know the depth of the connection before she left the world. Claire believed the truth would bring comfort one day, not confusion. She wanted Sandra to understand that kindness works in circles far larger than human understanding. Keanu felt tears gather quietly in his eyes, warm and unforced. He did not hide them. He allowed the emotion to rise because the story deserved honesty. He said softly that he never expected anything to return to him from his anonymous giving. He had never imagined that one of those places would become part of Sandra's journey. He had simply followed his heart, wishing to honor someone he had loved deeply. The idea that the gesture had come back to him, in such a meaningful way, felt almost too powerful to hold. Sandra squeezed his hand gently, her eyes full of warmth. She said that she believed his sister would have been proud of him. She said the kindness he offered the world had not vanished. It had found its way to someone who needed it at a moment of quiet despair. She said the day he appeared at the center had felt like a sign to her, as if something beyond their understanding had guided him toward her healing. She believed his heart had recognized her pain even when she tried to hide it. Keanu breathed deeply, overwhelmed yet steady. He asked her if she believed the photograph had resurfaced because the story needed to be told now. She nodded softly. She said the picture had waited because they were not ready earlier. She believed the universe waited for a moment when both of them could face the truth with clarity, humility, and emotional maturity. She said the resurfacing of the photograph was not an accident. It was a gentle reminder of the beautiful ways kindness travels, returns, and reveals itself. He looked at the photograph again, seeing it with new eyes. He understood now that it held multiple layers of meaning. It showed a moment he had forgotten but lived with sincerity. It captured the fragile strength of a friend who needed comfort. It preserved the memory of a volunteer who believed in silent acts of compassion. And it carried the legacy of his sister, whose spirit had helped shape the path that brought Sandra healing. Then Sandra spoke the final truth, the one she had been saving for the end. She said she believed the photograph resurfaced because it carried a message meant for him. She pointed at his younger self in the background and said that he had always been someone who offered quiet support to others. She said the picture was proof that even when he lost a memory, his kindness had remained intact. She said the photograph reminded him of who he truly was, not as an actor or a public figure, but as a man with a gentle and unshakable heart. Keanu felt the words land softly inside him, filling a space he had not realized needed healing. He smiled a small, emotional smile, touched by the sincerity in her voice. He lifted the photograph and held it gently as if it were something sacred. He said he finally understood why his reaction to the picture had been so emotional. The truth was not just about the day he forgot. It was about the connection that ran beneath everything, a connection built through kindness, resilience, and quiet respect. Sandra leaned closer, her presence warm and steady. She said the story behind the photograph was a reminder that kind actions never disappear. They travel through lives, shaping moments, healing wounds, and returning in unexpected ways. She said the photograph was a piece of their shared journey, a silent testimony of how deeply two people can be connected without ever realizing it fully. Keanu nodded slowly, feeling peace settle into his heart. He thanked her gently for trusting him, for sharing the truth, for holding the memory with such grace. She smiled warmly, saying some stories belong to the heart and reveal themselves only when the heart is ready. They sat together in quiet understanding, the photograph resting between them like a bridge that connected past and present. The truth had finally been spoken, the emotions had been shared, and the circle of kindness had closed with beautiful clarity. As Keanu looked at Sandra with gratitude and quiet admiration, he knew the photograph would no longer haunt him. It would guide him. It would remind him that even forgotten moments can carry deep meaning. It would remind him that kindness, offered freely, always returns in some form. He placed the photograph gently back on the table and whispered the words that felt truest in his heart. Kindness never leaves, it waits, it returns, it heals.